As I stand here today on Friday, we are now in day number 5 of another war in Gaza. And there's unspeakable tragedy occurring with the loss of life both of Israelis and Palestinians. What is somewhat disturbing is listening to the media describe the outbreak of the war. There was one particular clip from the CBC which said that the Gazan or Hamas was actually sending missiles to Israel in response to Israeli attacks on Gaza. Now, on the one hand, you could say the reporter was mistaken. On the other hand, any reporter who knows what's happening is clearly aware of the facts on the ground, and that is obviously not what has happened, and it never happens. Israel doesn't just go in and attack. It's in response to missile attack from Gaza. And there's also, of course, a lot of misinformation about the cause of the war. Another clip that I heard said, well, settlements in Israel are causing this war. And there's nothing to do with settlements. It has to do with the displacement of a number of families in East Jerusalem, which is actually the outcome of a complicated court procedure. And it's something which we have to deal with, or Israelis have to deal with, but it's not exactly the way it says, the way they say it or portray it, is that we're trying to just expel Arabs from East Jerusalem. That is not at all what's happening. And Hamas attacking has nothing to do with that. It's them taking advantage of the situation, and they're really reacting, as everyone who knows the facts on the ground would tell you, is because the elections that Mahmoud Abbas called off because he was afraid of losing to Hamas is now causing Hamas to try to show that they are still a major factor in the area, and they want to be the heroes on the side of the Palestinians. And when the media glosses over all of that and just creates this moral equivalency, it really is quite disturbing. You know, as I watched for the last 4 or 5 years, most of the media dropped their moral equivalency when it came to talking about Donald Trump and his what they call lies. At first, they would just say he's factually incorrect, and finally they dropped that and said, no, these are lies. But yet, when it comes to Hamas or the Palestinian Authority, the media is just as quick to promote their lies and create their own lies in order to create this somewhat what they call a balanced approach to that which is happening, to the crisis that's going on in Israel. It is not so. And we have to be willing to call out their lie and to say, no, this is not what's happening. And we have to make sure that we understand that Israel does not just attack. And when there is a war going on, Hamas is sending thousands of missiles indiscriminately into Israel. And when I say indiscriminately, it doesn't mean they're just shooting them because they're trying to hit soldiers, and if they hit civilians, so be it. No, they're sending these missiles specifically into civilian areas to kill civilians. And what Hamas and the Gazans have put their money into was creating missiles, creating tunnels in order to attack. They're not spending their money to promote the economic welfare of the Palestinians in Gaza. And they're not spending money for the defense of those civilians in Gaza. Israel puts their money into creating the Iron Dome, which is there to defend the civilians, the citizens of Israel, and the citizens both Arab and Israeli. And we have to realize that as was said by Colonel Richard Kemp, a retired British Army officer, he said that Israel is the most moral army in the world. And there was a high-level military group composed of military experts from Australia, Colombia, France, Germany, India, Italy, the United Kingdom, the United States, and Spain. And when they were talking about one of the last Gazan wars, they acknowledged that Israel made unprecedented efforts to avoid civilian casualties, exceeding international standards. Israel consistently puts their own soldiers' life in danger in order to make sure that they don't put civilian life in danger in Gaza. Of course, there are civilians who die. But what's left unsaid, of course, and we all know it, is that Hamas is actually shooting missiles from civilian areas. They're using young children as a shield against Israel. they actually are happy with the fact that civilians die because that promotes their cause, that they're the victims. And of course, what's also not mentioned in the media is that about 1/3 of the missiles shot from Gaza are actually landing in Gaza and killing their own citizens. And then Hamas will claim that Israel has killed these civilians through missile attacks when it's their own missiles. And again, the media knows this. The media, all they have to do is do a Google search, and they can find out most of the facts of the past, and they know what's going on in the present. And therefore, it's really something that we all have to stand up and make sure that we make these statements in defense of the state of Israel. But it's also important that we realize that what's also going on in Israel is now that there's riots. And of course, there's riots where Arabs are attacking particular individual Jews, and there are also a group of Jews that are attacking Arab civilians in the streets of Israel. This is totally unacceptable, and it's something that hardly happened in Israel until now, and it's something that we also have to stand up and protest, as Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu did on TV the other day, and he said this is not something which we could accept. We cannot take the law into our own hands. And with that, I just want to end up with a verse from Hosea, which we will read tomorrow on this coming Shabbat, which actually says about our relationship with God. And it says, "Ve'irastach li la'olam," God is saying, I will marry you or be bound to you forever. "Ve'irastach li b'tzedek," over mishpat, over chesed, over rachmim, and I will be bound to you with righteousness, with justice, with kindness, and with mercy. "Ve'irastach li be'emunah," and I will be bound to you with faithfulness, v'yadat es Hashem, and you shall know God. And I think what this is saying is that our knowledge of God, our attachment to God, our relationship with God is one in which we have to emulate God. And the way we see God is the God of justice, the God of mercy, the God of kindness. And that's what we have to emulate. And that's what I think we as Jews have to stand up for. And therefore, what Israel does in making sure to protect civilians and non-combatants when there's a war is something which is really the Jewish way, which we've been taught for generations and for thousands of years. And it's something that we hold very dear to us, and understand that we see our God not as a God of war and vengeance, but mostly a God of kindness, of justice, of rachamim, of mercy. And we have to act in that same way. And we have to make sure that the world knows that that is what we stand for. We stand for morality and ethics. And sadly, people do die in a war, in a defensive war, but it doesn't mean that we don't have the right to defend ourselves. And therefore, we have to make sure that the world knows that, but we also have to continue to act in that moral way. We can't give up our ethics or our morality because the enemy does give up their morality and ethics. And hopefully with that, we can go into this Shabbat thinking that hopefully this war and this tragedy will end soon, and we'll be coming to a more peaceful time. Shabbat Shalom.